Say good evening to everyone. I am Megan Fall, Vice President of the Arkansas Audubon Society, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the second annual meeting, second virtual meeting of the Arkansas Audubon Society. The Arkansas Audubon Society was founded in 1955 to conserve the natural resources of Arkansas with a focus on birds. Specifically, the Society promotes research through our trust, conservation through our bird records and bird-friendly yard initiative, and finally, education through our youth ecology camps. I'd like to begin the evening by saying I hope all of you had a wonderful week and a great day birding on your own. And I want to say thank you to all of you who participated in our Counties of Arkansas Week, or CAW. We'll have a short presentation a little later about the results of CAW, including some great maps that Kevin Krazier put together for us. After our speaker presentation, we'll go over the Society Trust Report and any business we may have. And the very first part of the evening, we have an excellent presentation planned for you, 101 Ways to Help Birds. The wonderful Laura Erickson will be giving this presentation based on her book of the same title. Laura has been a scientist, teacher, writer, wildlife rehabilitator, professional blogger, public speaker, and photographer. She didn't know how to identify birds until after her mother-in-law gave her a field guide and binoculars for Christmas in 1974. Then she was soon subjecting her middle school students and readers of her columns to endless stories about birds. In 1986, Laura started producing For the Birds, a radio show now airing on radio stations from Oregon to New York. For the Birds is the longest running radio program about birds in the United States, and it's also available as a podcast on her website or through iTunes. She's also currently a columnist and contributing editor of Birdwatching Magazine, and she has authored 12 books about birds, including 101 Ways to Help Birds. Laura served as a licensed wildlife rehabilitator focused primarily on songbirds and especially common nighthawks while she was a stay-at-home mother in the 80s and 90s. She has counted raptors and songbirds at Hawk Ridge Bird Observatory and other sites in Duluth, Minnesota, and studied nighthawk digestion as part of an ill-fated PhD project. And I thought this was so funny. Her professor told her that she was the world authority on nighthawk digestion, even as he mentioned that no one else particularly wanted that distinction. Laura is also the recipient of many awards. Most recently, the 2020 Minnesota Ornithologists Union Thomas Sadler Roberts Memorial Award. Also included in her list are the 2014 American Birding Association's Roger Torrey Peterson Award, the Hawk Ridge Bird Observatory Lifetime Achievement Award, and several awards for her books. So without further ado, please welcome scientist, wildlife rehabilitator, photographer, and award-winning author, Laura Erickson. Laura.
Well, I hope I can live up to that really nice introduction. I'm going to talk about my book, 101 Ways to Help. I'm not going to do 101 ways to help, especially because now there are more than 101 ways. But I was thrilled to be invited to this meeting. I've never, ever done a program in Arkansas before, and I have very warm feelings about the state, which I'll talk about a little bit. But you guys were doing birding contests today. This was the room I'm in right now is my home office, and I opened the window and took a video of my birds. And these guys used to be everyday birds in Duluth through the whole year, and they've disappeared since the mid 90s. Thanks to this big eruption year, they're coming through right now. And for the last week and a half, I've had this whole wonderful flock. The window's wide open here, but you'll notice they don't come in. One bird will perch on the windowsill, but it just looks around, says she's no Martha Stewart, and takes off again. But I love Arkansas. I was in your state for like 3.5 weeks back in 2006, doing my best to see an ivory-billed woodpecker, but just relishing the wonderful birds that I saw here. I think the only ones of these pictures that I took in Arkansas were this winter wren and this red-headed woodpecker. I did see my lifer, Smith's longspur, at the Stuttgart Municipal Airport, but this is a picture I took just this past fall as it was migrating just north of Duluth, and I lucked into seeing it. But I adore your tufted titmice too. They don't come as far north as Duluth. So, but I had such a wonderful time when I was there not seeing an ivory-billed woodpecker. I got to go birding with a bunch of wonderful people one day. That was really fun. And I bought Jimmy, this wooden ivory-billed woodpecker, who is hanging in my living room right now and delighting my grandson. As Megan mentioned, I started birding when I got my first pair of binoculars, and I'm so lucky to actually have a photograph of opening my first pair of binoculars for Christmas. And it turns out I was watching some old reruns of the Bob Newhart show, and Suzanne Plachette, Emily in it, was wearing, I swear, that exact same outfit, the plaid long skirt and the skinny shirt. But um, Now I've graduated to a little bit more expensive equipment. When I started out, I was a teacher and I cared passionately about my students and their futures. Then in the 1980s, I produced my own little bird watchers and became even more driven in terms of conservation and the environment because these guys were going to grow up into it. And now I finally have a grandson who I'm looking at through the same window in my office, and you'll see the chickadee sitting there looking for mealworms. And my grandson just loves how they come in. He says, "Hi, chick." I say, "Hi, chickadee," and he waves his arms, and then they fly off immediately. And I say, "Bye, chickadee," and he waves his arms. He's adorable. But that gives me a real stake in the future. I'm going to be 70 in November, and my family doesn't have a really good track record at longevity, uh, but I have a real stake in him being able to see through real binoculars, not a teething toy, all the birds I got to enjoy. I was a freshman in college for the first Earth Day, and I felt so passionately about the environment, but I did not have a clue about it. This necklace my mother-in-law bought me for the third Earth Day, 1972, 2 years later, and I still wear it. But they had all these dramatic posters about these endangered species, only one of which I'd ever heard of, the bald eagle, but I'd never, ever, ever seen one. I grew up in Chicago, in the city, and then in a little blue collar suburb. And I couldn't imagine that one day I would actually take a picture of a bald eagle or pictures of them courting and I used to teach junior high, so of course I have to show one of a bald eagle pooping. That's just what junior high teachers with no sense of dignity have to do. But I'd never heard of a peregrine falcon. They seemed so cool, and I certainly did not want them to become extinct, but I'd never known there was such a bird. And now there's even one named for me. This one was one of the ones that her parents nested. This was actually her mother, and this was her chick, banded in Duluth by a group of people, and I talked about them a lot on the radio. So they named this little baby after me. And I never imagined seeing California condors. They were on the brink of extinction. By 1970, they were in huge trouble. And in 1986, they captured every single one out of the wild because they all were suffering from uh, lead poisoning. And now I've seen them and taken pictures. I'd never heard of Kirtland's warbler. At the time, I was going to the University of Illinois. And right when I started bird watching, I was living in Michigan, going to Michigan State University, and they named Kirtland's warbler the state's bicentennial bird. It was so critically endangered, there were fewer than 200 pairs on the planet. And they wanted to get the number up to 200 for the state centennial and the nation's bicentennial of 1976. But I actually got to see that bird and then later photograph it. This is actually me on June 6, 1976, looking at my lifer, Kirtland's warbler. My husband took the picture. I had no clue there was such a bird as a black-capped vireo. This was one of the very first birds listed under the Endangered Species Act. I'd never heard of that, but then again, I'd never heard of a black-capped chickadee either, much less a Carolina chickadee, which is the one you guys get to see. I'd certainly never heard of Bachman's sparrow, which is on your state's threatened or endangered list, much less Bachman's warbler, which still existed possibly when I started breeding. Well, it definitely still existed, but and it was shown in my field mark without this little tragic cross because now it really is extinct. That picture was from my first field guide, the Golden Guide, but Bachman's warbler is indeed extinct. There actually is one photograph from 1958. There's probably several more out there, but they're hard to find. The last confirmed sighting of Bachman's warbler was in Cuba in the winter in 1988, and the last confirmed nesting observations were all the way back in 1937. When I was in Arkansas, I was thrilling at getting to see red cockaded woodpeckers. I took this picture in Florida. I actually got some pictures when I was in Arkansas, but I had a really crummy camera at the time, so I didn't. And this isn't a very good picture either. I'd never heard of least terns. This is a coastal bird. My best picture of an inland least tern is this, but I all these endangered birds that I was saying I wanted to protect the environment, but I didn't know about the environment. I wasn't very good at explaining to people with anything more than passion. There was no information behind the passion. The more we learn about each kind of bird, the more we can love them. It's just like people. If you don't know somebody, you may have this intellectual sense that they deserve fairness and justice and stuff, but you don't care passionately until you know somebody. And it's the same with birds. So chickadees became my little Statue of Liberty bird because when warblers are migrating through Duluth, they gravitate to chickadee flocks. Warblers that hatched out in Canada, as they're migrating south their first year, the one familiar sound they know from their own habitat is the chickadee sound. They all know what the chickadee warning call means, that there's a raptor overhead. They all know that chickadees are insectivores and will take them to the best food. And chickadees know where the water is, they know where to hide out from predators. So these guys who are strangers in a strange land and often in Duluth, tempest tossed, tired and poor and huddled masses, they go to the chickadees. So that's why um, learning that about chickadees made me love chickadees even more. And that's how it is with just about any kind of bird. The more you learn about it, the more you appreciate it. Now this year I have chickadees nesting in our dead cherry tree. And later on, you're going to see a couple of pictures from this tree when it was alive and not riddled with holes. There was actually a hole beneath this one. And I knew that when the birds got down that far after doing all that work, they weren't going to be able to use this hole because the hole lower than it would let light in, and there were a whole lot of holes lower than that. So we put a piece of bark against that hole and taped it to the trees, and the chickadees just fine with that. So, and the hole actually goes beneath that hole too. But they're working very hard at that. And then they, after they excavated their hole, this is that same window in my office. My neighbor has a dog and brought over a bunch of white fur from the dog. Um, Dog fur and cat fur, as long as the fibers aren't too long, are excellent nesting materials to set out for birds. But this is the female chickadee. Now she started incubating, and so I'm having so much fun watching her. The more I'm observing them and taking videos, the more I'm loving chickadees in general. It's so much work to excavate your own hole. The more we love birds, the more committed we become to helping them. And I love piping plovers. They don't nest in Duluth anymore. The last time they attempted to nest here was right after we moved here in 81. I think 82 or 83 was the very last time, and they hadn't succeeded in several years. Um, but piping plovers are so adorable. And when you watch them, how hard both parents work to, they both incubate the eggs, unlike chickadees, only the female does. And then when the babies are hatched, they are cosmically adorable. And the parents work so hard to keep them alive. And the more you learn about these things, the more committed you become to helping them. The areas are restricted where they nest because they nest right on the beach, and people naturally want to use the beach and want to walk their dogs on the beach, but they don't care about piping plovers unless, they're not like my dog Pip, who says she's a pets for plovers dog, meaning she never goes on the beach when piping plovers could be there. But some people, I took this picture right by the sign of keeping dogs off the beach. And so people who love plovers have become active, like my friend Susan Cecil, who is a monitor in Chicago for the Montrose Beach piping plovers. People cared about them enough, and enough Chicagoans learned about them and started caring about them that they managed to stop a music festival that was going to take place on this beach in 2019, which was the first year piping plovers had tried to nest in Chicago since 1955. So the birds were important, but it was the passion of the people that protected them. The more we understand about birds, the more effectively we can defend them. When you know what the causes of mortality are for piping plovers and what affects their breeding success, and you can explain that accurately to people, the more successful you are in defending them. I live in Duluth. We have a big tower farm, and I started learning about how many birds are killed at towers. They're attracted during migration, especially when there's drizzle or fog or a lot of really low clouds and they can't see the sky to see the stars, which give them their direction. When they can't see those, they move toward lights. And when they start milling around the lights, that's when they collide with each other, with the tower, and with the guy wires. And we had a whole lot of solid information about the migration in Duluth. And that's how the information I used from that and doing my research on how they get killed at towers is how, when our first cell company in the late 80s wanted to build a guide lighted tower right on our hawk migration pathway, that's how I got to stop them. I had the numbers about how many warblers and other songbirds are using that could collide at nighttime because of the lights. And then about how I had data from the Raptor Center just down in the Twin Cities about like a peregrine falcon that literally sheared its wing off as it collided with a guy wire. And so having the facts, I became the first, and I think maybe still the only person who ever actually stopped a proposed tower because of its potential impact on birds. This is just 150 miles down I-35. The Viking Stadium, we could not stop that from being constructed with bird killing glass, but we did get a lot of monitoring and a lot of important stuff. Here in Duluth, our hospital is building this whole huge glass structure only because of my being involved in the Viking Stadium issue. They asked me what they could do to limit the number of birds killed. They're going to use fritted glass on the entire structure. The fritted glass will mainly help birds. That's little etchings in the glass that make it more visible without as much reflection. Those will be on the lower, they'll help birds on the lower stories. But will not be particularly useful for nocturnal migrants as they're going through at nighttime. And so I said they also must have shades because they want all the rooms to be glass walls. And I said they have to have shades that the hospital culture becomes those shades have to be drawn unless a patient wants them open. And then they'll be closed again when the patient goes to sleep for the night because the lights are what draw in the nocturnal migrants at the higher elevations. This man, Daniel Clem, is my hero. He's devoted his entire adult life since he got back from Vietnam researching birds colliding with windows. He did all the foundational research. And as a matter of fact, major environmental organizations did not get into the issue. They were poo pooing it as only hurting individuals, not populations, until he did a paper saying it was on the order of 500,000,000 to 1 billion birds are killed at windows in the United States every year. And they were totally poo pooing that, but people kept asking him because his paper was presented at some meeting where suddenly some national news reporters got wind of that big number and started putting it in articles all over the country. So some of the big wig scientists decided they were going to do a study to prove that number was way off, except when they did the work, they found out he was right. And that's when they all jumped on the bandwagon about Windows too. When you know about birds, share that information. That helps birds in the long run because it gets more people to care about them. But anyone who's a birder knows how much knowing about birds has enriched our lives. And we can give that to other people too. These pictures were from Hawk Ridge here. So I wrote this book in 2005 and 6. It came out in 2006. My working title was Resounding Spring because it was going to be the answer to the ways we can prevent silent springs. And it's dedicated to Rachel Carson. We There's so much collective action that the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, the American Bird Conservancy, so many Audubon organizations from national down through the state organizations, they've done so much valuable work, and supporting that is so important. But we also need individual action, both the things we can do at home, but also in terms of the ways that organizations get stymied. that first Earth Day, some of our college professors were feeding us information about the effects of pesticides and different things on birds, but they were begging us not to give their names as the sources of the information because the companies that manufactured the different pesticides and other toxic things going into the environment, those companies making them were also funding a lot of research. And so they couldn't be tied in with that. After the BP oil spill, I went down there and I and other individuals were able to speak out. The government, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, BP demanded, and they gave them a 5-year moratorium on presenting any data about the oil spill. And I was even asked by one organization to tone down what I was saying. I said, have I said anything inaccurate? I wanted to be absolutely accurate. No, I hadn't, but they were getting pressure because they didn't want people, the organizations wanted to get the word out and they were so frustrated, but they were going to lose funding and different kinds of agreements and partnerships with Fish and Wildlife. It was horrible. So we need both. So I wrote this book, but it was not a bestseller by any stretch of the imagination. And right now, all the information in the book and more are on my website, lauraerickson.com. And if you go to lauraerickson.com, click on Ways to Help, and you will get a page that has all 101 ways and more now. And then you just click on one of them, make your windows safer for birds. And I write about that. And I have links that will take you to pages that show more pictures and more technical what you do for the situation so you can help birds. Um, we need collective action, and that's put together by Audubon groups who've made bird safe building guidelines that companies can use, that architects can use. But we also need individual action when we're purchasing windows. Double hung windows, the screen is on the outside. When you have crank windows, the screen is on the inside and the birds see the reflective glass. This is a nature center in Minnesota. They have their bird watching garden, and birds were crashing into their windows. So they ripped out the whole wall and they put it in with the windows all angled downwards. So the windows are not reflecting the sky and they're not reflecting trees, they're reflecting mostly the ground. And so they almost entirely eliminated bird strikes by changing just the design of the building. But we can't do that to our houses necessarily. This is the Roe Sanctuary, the Audubon Sanctuary in Kearney, Nebraska, where the sandhill cranes collect. And they built this fabulous green building. And the first day when they were having their big gala opening celebration, all these birds started crashing into the windows, all these Harris's sparrows and other innocent little birds. But a man there got the idea of making these bird screens. And these are hung up just by the suction cups like you some bird feeders go on, and they're just like broom handles or dowels, and it's just window screening, and they can roll them up or take them down when they're using a particular window where they really want an unobstructed perfect view. But otherwise, these have eliminated their bird strike problem. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology made their lab, their brand new beautiful lab. Birds immediately started crashing into the window overlooking their bird feeding garden. So they put this bird screen up. It's taut. So it's like a trampoline. If a bird does crash, it just bounces off, but it's a few inches from the glass. Here's where the glass is, and here's where that is, just on the outside of the window frame. And so that ended that problem. At the EPA lab where my husband works here in Duluth, they have these windows that are uh, at a right angle to the shoreline of Lake Superior. So in spring and in fall, birds are crashing into the windows on one side or the other side of this long hallway that is windows on both sides. And so they allowed the employees to put up uh, screening. And it's on the roof. They were not allowed to make any permanent changes to the building. So they just put a bunch of cinder blocks up there and rocks to hold it in place and vastly reduce the kill. And they could still see out the window. But there's all kinds of other things. The American Bird Conservancy was selling this bird tape, and if you use silhouettes, birds don't know that's supposed to be a peregrine falcon, and they can tell it's not a real peregrine falcon. You need more than just one sticker. They have to be spaced so there's no bigger than a man's hand span between the stickers. If you use fritting or the tape, if it's vertical, it should be no more than 4 inches apart. And if it's horizontal, it should be no more than 2 inches apart. They call it the 2 by 4 rule. And look, they have blinds in here, but the reflection of the trees is what the birds see and are paying attention to. They make some stickers that are more intensely colored if you can see within the UV range, which birds can. The problem with those is that UV pigments break down really quickly, so they only last for a year or two. One guy came up with these really cool things that he calls bird savers or Zen wind curtains that are made from paracord, which you can buy in any Menards or Home Depot. And they have to be no more than 4 inches apart, but you can hang them up either permanently or just with something that is, they could be on a dowel that you have just temporarily fixed up there, and they've been extremely successful. Having your feeders exactly on the window or within 3 feet minimizes kills. Once in a while, the birds will get scared at my window feeders when a hawk rips through, but the few that have ever hit the window from a window feeder, they have no momentum yet, so they don't get hurt. Where if it's any more than that, they do get hurt. But birds do, some of them do figure out windows. This was a chickadee who would tap on the window if I wasn't paying attention when it wanted me to crank it open for mealworms. Lights out programs are a collective thing. Supporting those as individuals, we can help a lot of birds. This is the beam that they sent up as part of the 9/11 memorial in New York City. And those lights within it, those little spots, are birds that were drawn in and couldn't get out and were dying. So if they find out it's a good migration night, they turn off the lights. It's not much of a memorial if it's causing even more death. But yeah, these are the birds and the beams. And buildings that are tall, they have to have lights for the Coast Guard, but a lot of people who live in high rises have their lights on at night. Closing shades and drapes and turning off lights saves birds, and lights out programs are to educate people. So, this is just 1 year's ruby-throated hummingbird kill in Toronto, where the Fatal Light Awareness Program originated. It's a lot of things. Anyway, my book has all kinds, and my webpage now has all kinds of things. Number 69, Fish Responsibly, and that means picking up after your tackle and especially your monofilament line. Some places are starting to provide these. Some Boy Scouts have set them up in different places in Wisconsin and Minnesota where you can recycle the monofilament. But one of my friends and I picked up this wad when right maybe 5 feet from the collection thing. We picked up that wad, and that was also the very pier where I got that picture. It's very depressing how much it affects birds. Here's a redhead that was entangled in it in Colorado. This I took in Wisconsin, and the people here, they did go fishing, but they didn't have any of their fishing supplies at their house. They had that at their cabin. And somehow this flicker had gotten entangled in monofilament somewhere. And then when it was feeding in this tree, the monofilament caught in the bark, and it was there for over a day before they called me because they thought there was a bird acting weird in their tree. They couldn't see the monofilament. Yeah, he was fine, but it was so sad how dangerous it is. Drive at the slowest speed that is safe, courteous, and convenient. If you drive slow when all the rest of the traffic's going fast, that's not safe for anybody. And also, if you're driving slow on this nice little 2 lane and suddenly a car comes up behind you and it's going to have trouble passing, speed up until it can pass or pull over. And make sure it's convenient. You can't drive slow if you're late for something, but choosing the slowest speed that is safe, courteous, and convenient will save birds. Tree swallows are supposed to look like this, not this. Cedar waxwings, yellow bellied sapsuckers, slow down. We also are subsidizing bald eagles. Well, that's not a bad thing, but we're subsidizing vultures and especially crows. And in my neck of the woods, the American crow population has become huge and is sort of unsustainably high. And they take out a lot of songbirds in their nests because that's what crows do. But when there's too many, that becomes a bad thing. Slowing down also saves energy, and that helps. And if we slow down and use less energy, we'll have less demand for oil. This is a red dot that was oiled. We'll have less need for these refineries that kill so many birds that burn up at these things. Understand the pros and cons of bird feeding. Bird feeding is so wonderful. But if you don't do it responsibly, if you don't realize that furnishing a whole lot of mealworms for bluebirds, you could actually end up causing harm because they get calcium deficiencies. If they eat too many mealworms, they aren't eating a balanced diet of other insects. You have to understand the cons. You have to understand the cons of subsidizing cowbirds and especially starlings and house sparrows so that you can do things right to minimize the harm. And so my book talks about that, talks about fruits and jellies, but offering them responsibly. Orioles love jelly. Cape May warblers do. I've had lots of birds come to my jelly. Once I had a yellow bellied sapsucker, but always offer it in tiny quantities. I have this great big bowl, but I just had 3 small teaspoons of the jelly at the bottom because one time, one morning, I led a field trip and I was going to be gone until afternoon when I had over like 7 orioles and 30 or 40 Cape May warblers. So I filled that bowl halfway with jelly. And when I came home, it looked like there was an alligator swimming in the water, just holding still, but submerged with 2 bulging eyes sticking up and the little tip of a beak. But it wasn't. It was a red breasted nuthatch who doesn't even eat jelly, but he must have crawled across the bowl in my feeder and gotten stuck in it. And I fished him out and I had to bathe him. I probably gave him 30 warm baths. It took so long to get him to look this good, and his feathers were still sticking together. And I couldn't use detergents, but jelly is pretty water soluble, but it took forever to get him cleaned enough. And when he finally, and fortunately, it was one that was used to coming to my hand for mealworms. And so I kept being able to feed him while I was taking care of him, getting him cleaned. But you don't want to keep them in any longer than you need, because you want them to be preening, which they're stimulated to do more in sunlight. And so I let him out. It was still 3 or 4 baths after this, but he did not look perfect. And he did not come back all day. And I was so panicky that some of the feather barbs weren't sticking properly and it had an accident in flight or something horrible. But the next day he was back, and there's just, I don't know if you could see it, but there's a little trace of jelly still here. I named him Jelly Belly. But he was okay. But that's how I learned a lesson. And I say I learned it the hard way, but I didn't. This bird learned it the hard way. Offer fruits, but make sure you don't let them get mold on them. And this is that cherry tree that my chickadees are nesting in now. The tree is deader than a doornail, but this was in happier times. Lots of birds love fresh fruits, and it's better to have native berry trees than a cherry tree. If you grow fruit for yourself, you probably don't want the birds to be eating it, but offer natural fruits. Provide water for drinking and bathing. This is a brown thrasher in an electrical bird bath. Here's an oriole at that same bird bath. And here's a pileated woodpecker. And I got this picture. I didn't even know they came to my bird bath, but I got the photo and video from a trail cam that I have set up by it. So this was the first I even knew a pileated had been there, was looking at my footage. But if you offer water, make sure you change the water frequently, even if it looks clean, because mosquitoes, the worst ones for transmitting West Nile virus and things, breed in stagnant water in bird baths. And any, if you have a little kid with a Tonka truck in the sandbox and the shovel part fills with water, mosquitoes are going to breed there. So changing the water out every 2 or 3 days, 3 or 4 days at the most, will keep mosquitoes from breeding there. Offer peanut butter and nuts. You don't really have to worry about birds. About it sticking on them. Watch how this pileated woodpecker takes a bite, but he wipes his bill a lot on the feeder. This is an old birch branch feeder that my father-in-law dug out holes for putting peanut butter in. I don't offer it in, this was in the winter. I only offer peanut butter when it's cold enough that not too terribly. This was kind of warm day, but and offer nuts. Blue jays love peanuts, but make sure if you buy peanuts that you buy them in the grocery store rather than at or it has to be peanuts that were marketed for human or pet or livestock consumption. The same with corn, because both of those can get contaminated with aflatoxins. And so they are screened for human, pet, and domestic animal consumption for feed, but they aren't tested for wildlife feeding and can be dangerous. Feed hummingbirds safely. Make sure you have native plants for them. They're going to get most of their food and all of their protein from native plants, from the bugs on plants. When you offer, nectar, that's great for them and they love it. Use 1/4 cup of sugar per cup of water, not or water, of water. During cold, wet weather, use 1/3 of a cup of sugar per cup of water. It can be a little bit stronger. Those are both within the range of natural nectar and flowers. But when it's a third of a cup, that is on the strong side, and they can get dehydrated because they need enough water to metabolize the sugar. So normally go with the quarter cup. No red food coloring. They've proven that is harmful. Change the water every 2 days or less, especially in hot weather. If the sugar water gets cloudy or if there's black scum in the feeder, you've waited too long. Another thing is it slowly ferments, and that has caused liver damage in hummingbirds. If you use dish detergent or the dishwasher, rinse them really well. And the first thing to think about if you buy a hummingbird feeder is to make sure it's easy to wash, that there's no little crevices where junk can collect. As you know, hummingbirds are not the only ones who go to hummingbird feeders. Offer suet, but again, be careful. Don't let it get rotten. Um, you get up here when we get cold weather in April and early May, yellow rumped warblers come to suet feeders, and that's only been within the past decade that it's become a regular thing. Um, I've had scarlet tanagers at my suet during bad weather. I've even had pileated woodpeckers come to this tiny suction cup feeder on my window, which was kind of astonishing. You can feed mealworms. Birds love them and they do give them a lot of protein, but they do not have calcium. Some people will put them in uh, different calcium type powder things so they're coated with it, but birds love them, and a lot of birds use them to feed their young, but you don't want them to feed that as the main thing growing babies who are growing their bones are eating. So if you have a robin coming like this, uh, uh, limit it to once or twice a day and then bring in the mealworms. Catbirds love them. Um, this yellow-rumped warbler, they are always looking for ways to find food in unusual habitats during migration. Every one of the yellow rump warblers who nests in the forests of the northern states and Canada has to fly over a lot of inappropriate habitat. This one was on the deck of a house I was visiting while my mother in law was playing cards with the ladies. I was looking at the birds, and all these cluster flies were on the inside of the window pane, and it came up and was tapping on the window trying to get them. So I got a fly swatter and smashed a bunch of them and put them out there, and it instantly figured out that I was offering these flies, and when it would eat them all, it would look and expect more. Take precautions to keep your feeder birds safe from toxins and diseases. That means using clean bird seed, making sure that the ones that do uh, potentially have aflatoxins, that would be peanuts and corn, come from a reliable source that you can be sure they've been tested. But also birds that crowd together, like my evening grosbeaks, they can be picking up seed after another bird pooped on it. So they can spread diseases quickly. So you have to make sure you're keeping the seed clean and tossed out when they've, you know, don't leave the shells laying around. And if you do see a sick bird, make sure you close down the feeders that those aggregations of birds are coming to. Red pulls, pine siskins, when they're around evening grosbeaks, they come in big numbers. Grow an assortment of trees, shrubs, and other plants, and I can't emphasize enough how important it is that they be native plants that are supporting native insects, but also that are growing seeds. The reason evening grosbeaks are still in my yard they come to my feeders, but they spend most of the time up in my box elders and my spruce trees. I don't have box elder seeds right now, but they do seem to be getting some insects or something out of the buds. They may even be eating some of the buds. And then hummingbirds, the natural native plants are so good for them. Attend and testify at public hearings and provide accurate information about important issues. You could do it as a spokesperson for an organization, or you could do it as an individual. My husband had this poster hanging up in his dorm room when we were in college: to sin by silence when they should protest makes cowards of men. But different people have different styles of protesting. I'm kind of soft spoken in some ways, but I can be very forthcoming about the factual elements of towers and building construction. And that is helping, speaking out the best ways you know how. But the one thing that irritated me about this poster was when I found out it was not Abraham Lincoln who said that. It was a woman, Ella Wheeler Wilcox, who wrote that. So I had to put that record straight. And another one of my 101 ways: buy a duck stamp. I have never been a hunter, but boy, I go to national wildlife refuges, Necedah in Wisconsin, Trustham Pond. I think this one's in Rhode Island. Yeah. And Ohio, the Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge, the Balcones Canyonlands National Wildlife Refuge, where I got my lifer golden-cheeked warbler, Merritt Island, Lake Umbagog in Maine and New Hampshire, Bosque del Apache in New Mexico, Agassiz in Minnesota, where you can see prairie chickens, Montezuma in New York, and I like taking my dog with me, as you can tell, the Wichita Mountains, that they became a wildlife refuge before the National Wildlife Refuge System even existed. So they're very proud of their name. And work to make conservation ethics a mainstream focus again. My big brother joined the NRA when he was maybe 10 years old. He learned so much about gun safety, about responsible hunting. That was so much the culture, so much of the land we've set aside for protecting birds came about because hunters and their hunting licenses and duck stamps set that land aside. And it's where I've seen so many non-game birds, as well as the prairie chickens in western Minnesota. It's so important that we try to get everybody together again. Conservation and a clean environment are not partisan issues, or they should not be. And that's all I have to say about that. So please stay safe and well. And I don't have much time because I think in just 10 minutes you're going to start your business meeting, but I will answer some if you have any. So let's stop the share.
Thank you, Laura. If anybody does have any questions, please put them in your chat box and I'll read them off to Laura.
If you don't see the chat box at the bottom of your screen, there should be a little chat button. And if you click that, it'll open a chat screen on the side.
Laura, I actually did have a question.
Yeah.
So it's been a few years ago, but myself and a coworker found a screech owl that was entangled in some monofilament. And I guess I just thought of it as kind of a freak accident. I didn't think of it as something like that happening too often. Does your website have links to like the recycling containers and things like that you showed?
I don't think so. That recycling thing was at the Santa Cruz, California, their fishing pier. and I was there birding. But if you just do a Google search, you'll find plans for them. That one was made out of that PVC
Yeah.
plastic, just a pipe with a thing. And it's a good project for Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts even to do, and or Girl Scouts. And it's one of those little things that, you know, I almost got killed on monofilament myself when I was doing my big year, and I was in Anzalduas County Park in Texas on the Rio
Okay.
Grande River, and I saw a hook-billed kite, and suddenly it flew right before I was 100% certain it was a hook-billed kite, and he landed over there, so I started running, and my foot got caught in some monofilament that had just been on the ground and was tangled in some weeds, and
Oh
I
no.
toppled over, and I always grab my camera first, and we were fine. I had a lot of bruises, but um, it's so dangerous, and it's just garbage when it's on the ground or up there. It's no
Sure.
longer useful, and when you bring it home, the best way to dispose of it at home isn't to throw the big wad in the garbage, because it's going to end up in a landfill, and that's how gulls and sometimes even eagles get tangled. So what you do is just, you have the wad it up and just cut it in half, and cut the wad in quarters and cut it in eighths, and so that you won't have any long lengths of it.
Okay.
And do
Okay.
the same thing with those silly plastic things for the Coke cans,
Oh yeah.
or bottles. They're supposed to be breakable now, but they aren't. And so I still use the scissors to cut them up before
Okay.
they go in the garbage.
Okay. It looks like we do have some more questions here. Well, Rosalie Overby says, thank you so much. I'll visit your website to learn more. And Deborah says, lovely talk. Dan, wonderful, inspirational presentation. Thank you. Robin has a question. She says, what is your favorite wildlife refuge?
It sounds really stupid, but it's the one I'm at right this moment. When I'm taking pictures of Rosie at Spoonbills and Merritt Island, that is my favorite National Wildlife Refuge. When I'm doing the loop where all the little markers showing a painted golden-cheeked warbler are on the whole loop where you're supposed to be able to find them, and I see a whole family of them, that is my favorite National Wildlife Refuge. When I'm looking at prairie chickens displaying, Agassiz is my favorite. It's so hard to pick. Um, if I only could go to one in the entire month of May, it might be the Wichita Mountains one in Oklahoma. I just love that place. I love black-capped vireos, and I think if a bird has black-capped in its name, I'm going to love it. But also, they have this wonderful campground that I've camped in all alone many times with my dog. Um, but at every campsite, there are painted buntings. There are there's a whole population of Mississippi kites, and you can't miss them. And the scissor-tail flycatchers, I mean, whoa. So, um, but then I'll go to Lake Umbagog and hear loons and hear a wolf at night, and I'll think, no, this is my favorite. So I'm not very good at favorites.
That's all
Um,
right.
Dan, I have talked to franchise owners at Wild Birds Unlimited. The problem is the individual stores are dependent on the franchise for where they get theirs. And um, the franchise gets them. I mean, the way we need change made in that is to pressure the government to add wildlife feeding to the requirements for um, uh, testing for aflatoxins. And it's, frustrated.
Yeah. Robin says she needs to go to the Wichita Wildlife Refuge.
I just fell in love with that place. Well, it was really funny. I'll just tell one story. Um, when my youngest child had just started kindergarten, I got an invitation. I belonged to the AOU, the American Ornithologists Union, the Wilson Ornithological Society, and the Cooper Ornithological Society. And the Wilson and Cooper ones were going to be having a joint meeting in Norman, Oklahoma. And I got the invitation, and it had a black-capped vireo on the cover. And just looking at that bird, oh, I so wanted to see that bird. And I talked to my husband. It was going to be a post convention field trip to the western part of the state, to the Wichita Mountains, and they were endangered. So my husband was totally cool with me going off to this meeting and then going to the post convention field trip and coming home. And so I even put together a paper about the warbler migration along Lake Superior. And you had to check a box if you didn't already have your PhD, and I didn't have my PhD. So I checked it. Well, that made the paper eligible for the Best Student Paper Award, and it won. But anyway, I was pretty proud of that. But um, like 4 days before I was supposed to leave, my husband found out he had to go to Washington, D.C. for a meeting, and I was going to have to come home 2 days early. So I was going to miss the banquet. So I didn't find out. He found out I won the award before I did because they called my house. And I couldn't go on the field trip. And that was the whole reason I signed up for the whole thing to begin with. So we decided I would leave 2 days early and go there before and try and find it on my own. So I camped in the Wichita Mountains. And we had a minivan, and I camped in there overnight. I came in, and Chuck Will's widows were calling everywhere, and barred owls, and I was just in heaven. Then I get up in the wee hours and go straight to the headquarters, but they didn't have any literature on the outside of the building. But there were painted buntings, blue-gray gnatcatchers saying every swear word in the book at Mississippi Kites. It was so cool. And when the office opened, I went straight in and went up to the secretary and said, "Where can I go to see a black-capped vireo?" And she was like out of the TV show Dallas. She had this big hair and these fingernails that were like sticking out, like I didn't know how she could type. And she looks at me and says, "Well, hun, this is an endangered species. You're not allowed to go back where they are." And I was devastated, but I did not want to cry in front of her. So I went back outside and to just kind of regroup. And there was a scissor-tail flycatcher sitting right in front of my car. And I decided, well, I'm here in this beautiful place. I'm going to figure out what I can do. So I went back in, and I was looking at they had a thing with the maps and all that, and I'm looking at that stuff. And this short guy with a 10-gallon hat and cowboy boots walks up, puts his arm around me and says, "Well, hon, is everything here to your liking?" I said, "Well, I really want to see a black-capped vireo." He says, "Well, that could be arranged." He was the manager, and he sent me out for the day with Joe Grabowski, the world authority on the black-capped vireos of Oklahoma. So I got to hold a black-capped vireo that day. So that's my Wichita Mountain story. How many life birds does Pip have? Oh wow, I've lost track. With the pandemic, I haven't taken her anywhere. Pip is my little tiny adorable dog, but it's over 100. But I don't know if it's a 200 yet. But I was so thrilled to be invited because I never ever have gotten to talk in Arkansas, even virtually before. And everybody was so friendly and kind when I was there in 2006 that I I camped a lot in the wildlife refuge. You guys have so many wildlife refuges, and I got to camp
Yeah.
with them, and it was hunting season, but that was what paid for them. And the hunters were all so nice to me and my friend Paula. It was so I had a lovely time, and I love Arkansas. So thank you for inviting me.
Well, I wish you'd been able to join us in person here, but I've really enjoyed your presentation tonight. I thank you so much for speaking to us. And we hope you can make an in-person trip again soon. Maybe see some more red-cockaded woodpeckers.
Yeah, I would love to come there when it wasn't the dead of winter, even though I didn't get to see any Smith's longspurs at the Stuttgart airport. But everybody at the airport was so nice. Of course, yeah, I mean, it was like shocking. So thank you.
Well, thank you. A couple more comments. You're welcome to Arkansas anytime. Delighted you saw your life for Smiths at Stuttgart, and thank you for your presentation, Laura. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Okay, well, guys, we're going to take a short break, about 10 minutes, and then come back for our business portion of the meeting. So it is now 8:12. Let's meet back about 8:22, okay? See.
Thank you, Megan. It's wonderful to see everyone tonight, even if only virtually. We'll begin with AAS Trust Chair Dan Scheinman, who will give his spring trust report. Dan, take it away.
Okay. For the spring 2021 session, the trustees granted 9 awards totaling $5,983. I think for the sake of time, I'll skip over the details. You can see who won how much for which projects in the newsletter. It's also, my trust report's also posted on our website. But I did want to say thanks to Dr. Thon Boves, Lynn Christie, Susan Harden, Dr. Cannon, and Samantha for helping to review proposals. Also, Susan Harden's term is up, so a replacement is needed. If anyone's interested in joining the trust, let me know. And then most importantly, fall 2022 is the 50th anniversary of the trust. And we're going to plan something special for that society meeting. Don't know what yet, but I'm urging everyone to help us meet our 50th anniversary goal of building the Endowment Memorial Fund to $200,000. We are only about $11,000 away from meeting that goal, with about a year and a half to do that. Of course, the more money we have in the fund, the more money we can give each season to worthy research, conservation, and education projects. So encourage everyone to make a donation to the trust, help us meet our goal, and look forward to our 50th anniversary celebration. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Any questions for Dan? Okay, I will now share an exciting outcome from the Society's virtual spring board meeting that relates to reducing newsletter costs. As many of you know, the printing and mailing of our newsletter, Arkansas Birds, is our biggest expense year after year. And while we have taken some measures to reduce the cost, there is still a need to get this item much lower if we are to have a more balanced budget. Our treasurer, Wayne Lynch, has been corresponding with printers in Hot Springs to get quotes for printing our newsletter. And all of the estimates he has received are significantly lower than what we are paying through our current printer based in Little Rock. For example, our spring 2021 issue cost about $825 with postage to print, whereas the quotes that Wayne received are more in the ballpark of $250 for comparable printing and postage. That's a potential cost reduction of nearly $600 per issue. As a result, the board passed a motion to authorize Wayne to do his due diligence and turn things over to a new printer in Hot Springs. as we know this is going to save us a lot of money. These reduced newsletter costs will be reflected in our new budget for 2021 and 2022, which I expect to email to our members later this spring or summer for approval. Are there any questions about this? And you can always place your questions in the chat box. We can respond to them now or later. Okay. So speaking of emails, I'm pleased to share that a subset of the board met via Zoom in late April to review the functions of the Society's MailChimp and Gmail accounts and ensure that pertinent board members can fully access and use these properly. Given the importance of virtual communication amid the pandemic, it's critical that our email correspondence with you all is effective and of a high quality. And I think you will see more of that in the coming months. Don't worry, we aren't looking to flood your inboxes by any means, but you may be hearing more about future meetings a little bit sooner than maybe this one. You'll learn more about conservation issues that you can take action on and more. Are there any questions or comments? Okay. At this time, I will turn things back over to our Vice President, Megan Fall, who will talk about our Fall 2021 meeting and today's birding competition.
Okay. Our fall meeting will likely also be a virtual meeting. If anyone would like to critique this meeting or make suggestions for the next one, please feel free to email me anytime. I welcome constructive criticism. And we also have an announcement that we were going to be doing a bird banding demonstration tomorrow, but because of weather concerns and concerns for the birds' health, we will not be doing that. So hopefully we'll get to do that sometime, but it will not happen tomorrow. If you have any other announcements yourself, please feel free to put them in the chat box. I do have one more announcement about the birding competition. It's quite possible that some of you did not know that the birding competition and call were separate events, and we did have a Google Forms sheet for you to fill in your information to enter that competition. The link is on the call to meeting announcement. If you would like to still enter that, you may. I only had 2 people enter their names, so you're perfectly welcome to still enter your name and information, and I will give you until about 12 o'clock noon tomorrow to do that and announce the winners over email. So if you'd like to do that, please feel free to find that link. If you can't find it, email me and I will be more than happy to send that to you. Okay. And that is all that I have at this moment. I'm going to welcome Kevin for the Counties of Arkansas Week presentation now. If you are ready to go, Kevin.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Megan. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for this presentation I've put together. All right, can everybody see that? My PowerPoint popped up. I didn't see nods because I was looking at the wrong thing. So,
ready to go.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, so talking a bit about Counties of Arkansas Week. So this was an idea that Megan actually came up with last fall, but we decided we wanted to give it a little more time to incubate and we can develop it. And so we put it out this spring for everyone to get involved with. And so going over the results. First, of course, I want to remind everyone what it was about. So there have been over 400 documented species of birds in the state of Arkansas. However, through eBird data, we've noticed that certain counties have less than half of those species documented within their borders, so less than 200 species. We believe that this was due to a lack of birders rather than birds in those areas. And so we wanted to challenge our members and friends to raise the number of those county records, especially in what we called the black hole counties, where there were less than 200 species observed in that county. So starting with the data before CAW, which is our Counties of Arkansas Week. So before May 1st, there were 14 counties in Arkansas that had fewer than 200 bird species documented on their eBird reports. 13 of our counties in the state actually had 300 or more species on eBird. And actually this has decreased a bit, and we'll talk about the change, I guess, from our conception of this idea in late January when we really started to develop it to right before CAW, there were 72 county records added. So a lot of winter and early spring birds that were records for a lot of counties. And that actually reduced our number to 14 from 16 counties that actually had less than 200 birds. So there was a lot of activity in the months leading up to CAW regarding county record birds. So this is before CAW. Using the legend, you can see the lighter color represents less than 200 species, the middle color 200 to 300, and the darker color greater than 300 species. And we are focusing mostly on what we call the north and south black hole areas of Arkansas. So in the north, we have Searcy, Izard, Stone, Independence, Jackson, and Randolph counties. And in the south, Pike, Nevada, Ouachita, Dallas, Grant, Cleveland, Bradley, and Lincoln counties forming those black holes. And then, of course, very birdy areas where lots of people and well-known birders across the state tend to live. Oops, there we go. So after CAW, from that week, this past week, we had a total number of 22 county records just within that week. So add that to, the 72 from the end of January to end of April. That gives us a total of 94 county records over the last, about 4 months or so. And we actually reduced the number of counties with less than 200 species to 13. So one of our counties, being Independence County, made it to the 200 club, but as I say, we don't have any new additions to the 300 plus club, which is, quite the hurdle to pass. So here's that map, again, showing Independence County now part of that 200 to 300 class, and then the rest of the county still less than 200. Making that and all the county records a little easier to see. This is the change from before to after CAW. So the number of new county records found within that week. A lot of no changes. A couple counties gaining 1, Columbia and Randolph County gaining 2 county records, and then Independence County taking the prize, I suppose, for most county records during CAW week with 5 county records. So I think it's cool to highlight some of those records. So these are non-black hole counties, including Boone, Columbia, Crittenden, Dacia, Lawrence, Poinsett, Sevier, Woodruff, and Yell counties. They had various county records, including black-bellied whistling ducks, Wilson's phalarope, Philadelphia vireo, yellow warbler, yellow-headed blackbird, lazuli bunting, willet, Scott's oriole, and common nighthawk. As for our black hole counties, the lower number of county records, Cleveland, Izard, Jackson, Montgomery, and Stone counties, with records of gray catbirds, Tennessee warbler, least flycatcher, blue-headed vireo, and Canada warbler. Then Randolph with 2 county records, Magnolia and Tennessee warbler, and Independence with 5 county records, including the golden-winged warbler, semi-palmated sandpiper, American golden plover, semi-palmated plover, and the upland sandpiper. So kind of summarizing everything and moving forward, we had 13 counties that still needed to get up to that 200 mark. Some of them are very close, including Jackson and Randolph counties. They're both sitting at 194 species each. And with spring migration still occurring, now's a good time to go out and get some potentially new records. But then the farthest from that 200 mark is Cleveland County, and a lot of the other ones in the South Arkansas black hole of birding. They could use some work, so if you're ever in the area, you'll probably stumble across some records. And of course, keep this in mind as the year progresses and as we get into winter and, a whole new slew of birds enters our area. There were no county records in 9 of the 16 black hole counties. So again, encouraging you to get out there. And, we found tons of records in the past few months. So there's plenty of, potentially fairly common species that may just have actually been ever documented via eBird. So get out there and see what you can find. And then there are actually a few counties within 10 species of cracking the 300 plus club. And that includes Garland, Chico, Craighead, Crawford, Little River, and Prairie counties. So keep those on your radar too, in case you find any really good birds out there. You can add those species to, or those counties to the 300 plus club. All right. That is all I have to share. I'm sure we could chat if there are any questions about that, but hopefully you were all able to go out and participate. I think I found a record Tennessee warbler in Izard County, so it was cool to be able to contribute in that way. So hopefully you guys got to do the same. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks.
That's a nice detailed analysis there, Kevin. Great job. Nice graphics too.
Thank you. I took GIS this semester, so putting my skills to use with the maps.
Kind of reiterate what Kevin said too, I'm a little encouraged by this. I think there are some birds out there that we can find and get out there and do it. You don't have to do it during a certain week. This would be an excellent time of the year to do it with migration going on, but check it out any time of year. Check out some of our low number counties and see if we can't get those numbers up. And have fun doing it too, guys. I had a lot of fun doing it. I think I may have had the Canada warbler for Stone County.
You did.
That may have been mine. So, yeah, okay.
Shout out to Dottie Boyles for finding lots of birds in Independence County.
Yes, Dottie Boyles and Karen Holiday did an excellent job. Thank you so much for that, guys. All right, any questions about that or? Let's see, Dan did have one more announcement. It said the society is considering moving the website to a new host. Suggestions for programs are welcome, and we may also need a professional to do the initial move for us. So if you have any comments in regards to that, please feel free to email any of us or chat right now. Alrighty. Well, we do have a few minutes left tonight just to socialize and say hello to fellow Arkansas Audubon Society members. And so I'll just conclude the meeting portion of tonight and say that I hope everyone enjoyed themselves. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I wish you some good spring and summer birding and hope you have a great night.
And now Robin's going to tell us ghost stories, apparently.